What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions. In order to get in as many people as possible, we must have short and succinct questions and answers to match. And at question number 1, I call Ross Greer.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether businesses which make use of unpaid trial shifts should be disqualified from receiving public sector grants and procurement contracts.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
The Scottish Government opposes the use of unpaid work trials. If a trial period is offered, then this should be paid whether it leads to permanent employment or not. And whilst employment law is reserved to Westminster, we are using all our levers at our disposal to promote fair work and to tackle worker exploitation. That, of course, includes through our public spend, and our Fair Work First approach asks employers in receipt of public sector grants, contracts or other funding to commit to adopting fair work criteria, including no inappropriate use of zero-hours contracts and payment of the real living wage. And we're now strengthening our conditionality approach by requiring recipients of public sector grants awarded on or after the 1st of July this year to pay all employees at least the real living wage and provide appropriate channels of effective workers' voices.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. I welcome the Minister's opposition to unpaid trial shifts, and I'm proud to have worked with the Government on the Fair Work section of the Butte House Agreement, which delivered that real living wage conditionality. Employment law may be reserved to Westminster for now, and our options here are limited, but the living wage conditionality for grants and contracts demonstrates that we can go a bit further. Given the Scottish Government's robust opposition to the injustice of unpaid trial shifts, can I ask the Minister if the Government will consider adding a new fair work condition which would ban companies who engage in this kind of exploitation from accessing public sector grants and contracts in Scotland?
Minister.
Ross Greer highlights a very good issue, and of course we were very disappointed when the Conservatives talked out attempts by Stuart McDonald MP in the House of Commons to put forward a private member's bill to ban this. However, in Scotland we are determined to go as far as we can within our current powers to tackle the most significant issues in the labour market and drive fair work practices using the powers we do have, as set out indeed in the Butte House Agreement, which Ross Greer referred to earlier. So can I just say to him, we will continue to examine how we can strengthen our approach to conditionality, and I will certainly ask my officials to consider the issues that he has raised today in Parliament, including highlighting our opposition to unpaid trial shifts as an example of good practice in any future update of our Fair Work First guidance.
Ivan McKee.
Payment of the real living wage is a key tool to tackle poverty, and I'm glad to recognise Highlands and Islands Enterprise as the first of our agencies to make all grant awards contingent on payment of the real living wage, and the fact also, of course, that this is a requirement for all businesses located in Scotland's green ports. Can I ask when this requirement will be rolled out to our other agencies as called for in our national strategy for economic transformation?
Minister.
Well, I thank Ivan McKee for raising the importance of the real living wage to tackle poverty in Scotland and low pay. And of course, 91% of Scots are now paid the real living wage, which is the highest rate across the whole of the UK. We are working alongside our enterprise and skills agencies to develop our stronger approach to conditionality. And from the 1st of July, as with the Scottish Government, public sector grants issued by the enterprise and skills agencies will require payment of at least the real living wage and provision, as I said before, of appropriate channels for effective workers' voices. And I do join him in congratulating HIE for being ahead of the game and proactive on this issue.
Katie Clark.
The Fair Work First guidance does not make trade union recognition a requirement for bidders, instead permitting alternative arrangements. It also stipulates that there should be no inappropriate use of zero-hours contracts rather than ruling them out completely. Will the Scottish Government commit to addressing these discrepancies?
Minister.
Can I assure the member that we are committed to addressing these discrepancies by arguing for more powers for the Scottish Parliament over employment law in Scotland? And that is the best way to strengthen the guidance and the law in this country, because we don't have the powers to go much further than what we've outlined in our current guidance, where we have to show proportionality in terms of our regulations. But I think we have gone very far in Scotland, and over £4 billion of public sector investment since 2019 has been subject to Fair Work First criteria, making a real difference to tens of thousands of workers across this country.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what additional fiscal measures it will put in place to reduce inequality in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Tackling poverty and protecting people from harm is one of the 3 critical and interdependent missions for the Scottish Government, and it is only with the full fiscal powers of a normal independent nation that ministers can use all the levers other governments have to tackle inequalities. However, our income tax policy decisions for 23-24 are estimated to add £519 million to the budget, ensuring we are making the best use of our limited tax powers. We have allocated almost £3 billion this year to support policies which tackle poverty and protect people as far as possible during the ongoing cost of living crisis.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? On the morning he was elected leader of the SNP, under a headline, "I'll hammer the rich," the First Minister declared himself to be a socialist. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us whether the newfound socialism of the new First Minister will extend to a proposal for a wealth tax being brought to Parliament before the end of the year? Yes or no?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, with the greatest respect, Presiding Officer, this is more complex than a yes or no answer. So let me give a principled position of the Government. We have always prioritised a fair and progressive approach to income tax policy. As I said in my original answer, that's been demonstrated by the decisions taken in the last budget. That builds on the progressivity that we have within the powers that we have. The recent work for the Institute of Fiscal Studies, for example, has shown that that progressive attitude that we have has seen more support being able to deliver to less well-off households. Now, of course, we will give consideration. The First Minister has made very clear he will give consideration to further measures that we can introduce, and I look forward to the constructive discussions that we can have with Scottish Labour on this, not just at the Anti-Poverty Summit, but as we move forward with our deliberations on taxation policies ahead of the next budget.
Question number 3, Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken, in addition to its public consultation, to engage with the fishing industry and the coastal communities that could be affected by highly protected marine areas.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallum.
Presiding Officer, it's always been our intention to develop these ambitious proposals hand in hand with those impacted by them. The member asks about action aside from the consultation. Well, prior to the consultation, we met with over 20 stakeholder groups representing a wide range of marine industries and users. These meetings included fisheries organisations such as the Scottish Fishermen's Federation and the Scottish Creole Fishermen's Association, aquaculture groups such as Salmon Scotland, environmental NGOs such as Environment Link, community representatives such as Coastal Communities Network and COSLA. Feedback from these meetings directly fed into our consultation. Since then, we ran 10 online information sessions from February to April to help anyone wishing to provide a response to the consultation, and we also provided additional targeted events with regional fishing industry groups such as the Western Isles Fishermen's Association and the North East Whitefish Forum, and I will meet with Coastal and Island MSPs next week.
Karen Adam.
I thank the Minister for her comprehensive answer. In recent weeks, I've spoken to a number of fishers across my constituency who have expressed their concerns around highly protected marine areas, and I welcome the First Minister's commitment last week not to impose on any community a policy that it is vehemently opposed to. Will the Cabinet Secretary reassure the fishers I spoke to and make the same commitment?
Cabinet Secretary.
I am happy to reiterate the First Minister's commitment, Presiding Officer. I firmly believe that you don't impose policies on communities, you work hand in hand with them to make them work. I want our island and coastal communities to help shape the creation of these areas, which is why we chose to consult so fully and so early in the process. So, as I've committed to from the very beginning, site selection will be a participatory process with meaningful community engagement at every stage.
Jamie Halker-Johnston.
The fishing industry and the communities built around it have been crystal clear in their opposition to this government's HPMA proposals. We stand squarely behind them. But their concerns have been cast aside by this government time and time again. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if the dismissal of these concerns are based on any sort of economic impact assessment the government has undertaken, or is this policy simply blind to the damage it could do to our rural economy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it's astonishing that I can read out the level of consultation that has been undertaken so far and point to a fulsome consultation right at the beginning of the process and yet still be accused of what the member was narrating there. The truth of the matter is that despite progress in improving the state of our marine environment, evidence tells us that we need to do more. The Scottish Marine Assessment of 2020 showed that a number of marine species were in decline, and the most recent UK Marine Assessment showed that across the UK good environmental status was not being achieved. But as I have said right from the beginning of this process, we recognise the strength of feeling on this, and we are committed to working hand in hand with communities to make this policy work right around the country.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Scottish Government recognise that lack of detail for communities up and down Scotland's coastline, whose livelihoods depend on the sea, has caused distress and concern? And when will the Cabinet Secretary visit Shetland to meet with the fishing and aquaculture sectors?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for the question. I narrated some of the interaction that we've already had with fishing and aquaculture sectors. I personally have committed to spend some time in the summer meeting with communities with particular views on that, and I would be happy to speak with Ms Wishart on that point. But what I don't accept is the accusation that by consulting early that has been problematic. We could have cherry-picked areas to pilot as other governments had done. I didn't think that was right. I wanted meaningful engagement right from the beginning.
Question number 4, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Scotrail regarding improving Sunday train services in West Central Scotland.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Transport Scotland regularly engages with Scottish Rail Holdings on improving Scotrail timetables, including Sunday services in the west of Scotland and beyond. Delivering a Sunday timetable has traditionally relied on overtime working. However, as part of the recent Scotrail pay deal, there is an agreement to bring Sundays into the working week within the next 5 years. This should end the current reliance on overtime for Sundays and presents an opportunity to enhance Sunday services, not just in West Scotland, but across the Scotrail network. In the meantime, we continue to improve the timetable where possible.
Pauline McNeill.
Presiding Officer, I declare my interest as a member of the RMT Group. Does the Minister agree that it's critical to improve Sunday services across Scotland to give people more choices in public transport? Even in central Scotland, services can be as infrequent as every 2 hours. As the Minister has said, it's a 6-day service run completely on the 7th day on a Sunday by the workforce volunteers paid overtime. So will the Minister commit to rebuilding trust with all 4 rail unions, necessary to enter into discussions with them about the other conditions that would be necessary, including, I wonder if you would accept, investment in new staff that would be required to improve services on a Sunday for the public?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I obviously want to have a good relationship with all of the trade unions who are involved in our rail network. I want to take a collaborative approach to all that we do here. And I think that we have already seen that change, as I outlined in my initial answer. Scotrail at the moment operates around about half the number of services on a Sunday that it does on a weekday. Glasgow in the west of Scotland is at the moment comparatively well served, with all suburban and urban routes running a minimum of 1 train per hour. This is, however, a reduction from the 2 trains an hour that works in most services during the week. We will move forward in this, and I can assure Ms McNeill and the Chamber that I will do everything possible to cooperate and be collaborative with trade union colleagues.
Question number 5, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met with NHS 5 and what was discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
Ministers and Scottish Government officials regularly meet with representatives of all health boards, including NHS 5, to discuss matters of importance to local people.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer and welcome him to his new post. Presiding Officer, I have raised consistently the issue of a new medical centre for Lochgelly. And indeed, I have written again just this week to the Cabinet Secretary to report that the current premises are dilapidated and unfit for purpose. Will the Cabinet Secretary therefore agree to visit the medical centre in Lochgelly with me to see for himself the awful conditions facing staff and patients? And will he agree to review the decision not to make this project the priority that it should be?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the local members' long-standing interest in the replacement of the Lochgelly Medical Centre, and I'm supportive of the replacement of the centre, and the member will be aware that it is one of the areas of priority for health capital funding. However, as it stands at the present moment, the capital budget is already fully committed. It's also been impacted by what was a reduction in our capital allocation by the UK Government, and also the very significant level of construction inflation which projects are facing. This has all resulted in a lack of flexibility within our existing capital funding arrangements, which is having an impact on projects such as the replacement of the Lochgelly Medical Centre. But I hear the members' concerns on this particular issue and their invitation to visit the facility, which I'd be more than happy to undertake with the local member.
Question number 6, Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to tackle the vacancies in child and adolescent mental health services.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government remains committed to improving the mental health and wellbeing of Scotland's population and to ensure everyone receives the best possible care and support from our health and care services. Delivering this can only be achieved with the right workforce capacity and capability. We have invested heavily in staffing in recent years, which is why CAM's workforce has more than doubled under this government. Responsibility for the recruitment of CAM staff lies with NHS boards. In the NHS Recovery Plan 2021-26, the Scottish Government committed to provide sufficient funding for around 320 additional staff in CAMS over the next 5 years, with the potential to increase capacity for CAMS cases by over 10,000.
Megan Gallagher.
Since December last year, there has been 190 vacancies listed. 89 of those were left unfilled for 3 months or longer. This comes after Public Health Scotland figures published last month that showed 70.1% of children were seen by CAMS within 18 weeks of referral, almost 20% below the Scottish Government's own target. Cabinet Secretary, these figures are unacceptable. When will this SNP Government make child and adolescent mental health services a priority? And how will this Government attract people into a profession that is stretched to breaking point?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, I recognise the concerns which the member is raising, and I can assure the member that child mental health services are a priority. To underscore that fact, we've more than doubled the CAMS workforce in the course of this Government's time in office. And, for example, I mentioned that we are in the process of recruiting another 320 additional staff in CAMS over a 5-year period, and we've already at some 67% progress on that recruitment programme. We want to continue to see that workforce increase, which is why we're putting in the additional investment. And the member will also be aware that we're actually now seeing more people through the CAMS network than we've ever done before. What we want to do is to make sure that children get the right services in their local communities in the way that best meet their mental health needs, and that's why we're continuing to make investment in CAMS services.
Question number 7, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the average waiting time is for neurology patients who are seeking an appointment with a physiotherapist.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Information on physiotherapy waits for people with neurology conditions is not held centrally by the Scottish Government. However, the member may be interested in some of the work we're taking forward to support those with neurology conditions. In 2019, we published a Neurological Care and Support National Framework for Action, which aims to ensure everyone with a neurological condition can access the care and support they need. The aims include improving the provision of coordinated health and social care, developing sustainable workforce models and ensuring high standards of person-centred care. Since October 2020, we have also invested £2.1 million with NHS boards and partner organisations to fund innovative projects to achieve better outcomes for people living with neurological conditions.
Paul Sweeney.
The Minister will be aware that this week is MS Awareness Week, and I commend the work of the MS Specialist Physio Service based at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, which works hard to support neurology patients across NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. However, research by the MS Society has found that there is extreme pressure on physiotherapy services in Glasgow, with patients waiting an average of 17 weeks for an appointment and 107 of 931 full-time equivalent physio posts lying vacant. So will the Minister please set out today how she plans to fill those vacancies and cut that backlog of physiotherapy appointments for neurology patients so they can access this vital support?
Minister.
For his question, and also acknowledging the importance of this week being MS Awareness Week with their hashtag MS Makes Me. We want everyone waiting for physiotherapy, including those with a neurological condition, to be seen as soon as possible. And NHS boards are working extremely hard during challenging times to support this. The most recent statistics show the number of patients seen in the quarter to December 2022 was at the highest level since March 2020. And last year saw over 1.2 million outpatients, an increase of 8% since 2021. So this is demonstrating progress that we are making. I do recognise that it is extremely challenging, and I am determined to work with health boards to ensure that we improve the current situation, and also with third sector groups that are also providing very worthwhile support to MS sufferers.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. Before we move to First Minister's questions, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery His Excellency José Alberto Briz Gutierrez, Ambassador of Guatemala. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This morning, Scotland's Auditor-General, Stephen Boyle, said this to the Parliament's Public Audit Committee about the £300 million estimate the SNP say it will cost to build 2 ferries. This is a direct quote from the Auditor-General. It would be folly to suggest that is a reliable figure that will be spent to deliver the vessels at this stage. So will the First Minister continue to defend his government's estimate for these ferries, or does he agree with the Auditor-General? That would be folly.
First Minister.
Well, what I would say, and of course I was listening to the evidence this morning, and I'll read the rest of the evidence later on today. Douglas Ross will be aware, of course, that the figure that was provided to the Public Audit Committee on the 22nd of December last year from the CEO of Ferguson's Marine, that is made up of a number of different factors. The Scottish Government is now reviewing these projections based on independent advice. That process of due diligence, which is of course important in any procurement, of course in any programme of this size, of this scale, but particularly given the cost overruns, even more important in the case of Ferguson's Marine. That process of due diligence is to conclude within the next few weeks. Regardless of that, of course, I repeat what has been said before when this question rightly has been raised by members of the opposition. It is unacceptable that we've had these cost overruns, the fact that we have had the delays to both 801 and 802. And again, once again, as First Minister, to island communities for those cost overruns and for those delays. But we are focused on getting these vessels complete so that island communities will see the benefit of these vessels.
Douglas Ross. I think even the mic operator had given up on that answer and switched it off because there was absolutely nothing there. Only a party that bought a camper van for 100 grand could think that paying hundreds of millions of pounds for 2 massively delayed ferries is a good deal. And we all know from the scandal engulfing the SNP that they really struggle with finances. But this is getting ridiculous. So will the First Minister stop the secrecy and be honest for a change? How much higher is the real cost to taxpayers going to be to deliver these 2 ferries?
First Minister.
I'm not sure I've taken too many lessons on financial literacy from the party of Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, presiding officer. But on the important issue that Douglas Ross is absolutely right to raise in this chamber, what I have said is that there is rightly a process of due diligence underway. That process will conclude in the next few weeks, and of course we will make it known what the result was of that due diligence. What I will never shy away from saying, rightly, that of course the cost overruns and the delays in relation to these 2 vessels is unacceptable. The island communities that are frankly frustrated and angry at those cost delays, those cost overruns and the delays, I completely accept their frustration and their anger. And therefore, we will continue to invest in Ferguson's Marine. We'll continue to do what we can to get these vessels ready in relation to the updated timescales. But that due diligence is important, and of course that is due to be complete in the next few weeks.
Douglas Ross. I mean, the Auditor-General knows the 300 million figure is folly, but it seems that the First Minister doesn't. He doesn't have a clue about the actual cost it's going to be for taxpayers here in Scotland. The bill for these vessels so far is already 3 times more than the original contract. But it gets worse, what we heard this morning, and the First Minister said he was listening to the evidence. So he will have heard the Auditor-General reveal this morning that the bonus system for highly paid executives at Ferguson Marine is still in place. The 2 ferries are not fit to sail, the costs keep spiralling out of control, and islanders continue to be left without vital lifeline services. So, First Minister, what on earth could these bonuses possibly be for?
First Minister.
Well, again, I won't disagree with Douglas Ross or neither with the Auditor-General, who, of course, the Section 22 report earlier this year made it clear that these bonuses should not have happened. They should not have been paid. I agree. If Douglas Ross will listen to the answer, I will give him genuinely an answer to the question that he is absolutely right to raise.
We will hear the First Minister.
Now, the former Deputy First Minister made it clear his anger, we share that anger, I share that anger at the fact that bonuses have been paid. The bonuses that are being paid, of course, relate to a decision made by the Remuneration Committee of Ferguson's Marine without consultation with the Government in November 2022. And those bonuses, I have asked if they can not be paid. Of course, the advice coming back is that they are a contractual obligation. Now, for future bonuses, for any future discussion or consideration of bonuses, I have made it clear there should not be bonuses paid in relation to vessels 801 and 802. So that has been made clear. The Chair will take forward, of Ferguson's Marines will take forward that work. It is my expectation, the Government's expectation, and the Chair of Ferguson's Marine knows this absolutely well, that there should not be bonuses in 23-24, the current financial year that we're in relation to this year, in relation to vessels 801, 802.
Douglas Ross. On every front, the SNP is engulfed in scandal, secrecy and a shameful waste of money. They are groaning about a waste of money when the First Minister has just accepted how much this is going to cost taxpayers. This week, the SNP's ex-treasurer, Colin Beattie, said it wasn't me, Gov, when he was asked about the notorious camper van before abruptly changing his mind. And Hamza Youssef has said he isn't sure if Scottish Government ministers are using burner phones. That's what the First Minister said. This is all starting to look like an episode of Line of Duty, but it's also a massive distraction preventing the SNP from getting on and delivering these vital services to island communities. And the problem for the First Minister is he has been personally involved in this ferry scandal from the very beginning. He was there at the SNP conference in 2015, beaming beside the disgraced Derek Mackay when the contract was announced. In 2016, he was behind Nicola Sturgeon, hoping one day he would be the First Minister to launch a ship with painted-on windows. And he was the Transport Minister inspecting the yards for years. Presiding Officer, we found a picture of the First Minister when he was Transport Minister visiting one of the yards. He was there that day to mark the halfway point in the build of these ferries. The only problem for Hamza Youssef is that picture was taken at the halfway point, according to him, in December 2016. More than 6 years ago. First Minister, that wasn't the halfway point. It wasn't even the start of this sorry saga. So how is the First Minister, who got us into this mess, going to fix it?
Before the First Minister responds, I will just remind all members that we do not use props in the chamber. First Minister.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a sign of Douglas Ross's real desperation, pathetic schoolboy tactics, inability to raise.
Thank you, members.
An inability actually to address what is a really serious issue, because I agree with the opposition when they rightly state the anger of island communities that these ferries have not been completed. So I give an absolute commitment, an absolute guarantee to those island communities that we are focused, and of course Ferguson's Marines will receive the resources that are required on the back of that due diligence that is being done in relation to the cost. So there are things that we should apologise for, and we will apologise for as the government. What we won't apologise for is, of course, saving hundreds of jobs in Port Glasgow at Ferguson's Marine. And Douglas Ross is shaking his head. I'm not surprised. He, of course, belongs to a party that is put...
First Minister, if you will just give me a moment. People are gathered here to hear questions put to the First Minister, to hear the First Minister respond. Can we please ensure that that is possible? First Minister.
And the reason, of course, why Douglas Ross was shaking his head when I was mentioning the fact that we have saved hundreds of jobs at Port Glasgow, at Ferguson's Marine, is because he belongs to a party, of course, that decimated communities up and down Scotland and left workers on the scrap heap, Presiding Officer. And he, of course, decided in his question to take a swipe at the SNP. Can I remind him, of course, that this week the SNP did release its membership numbers. I'm pleased that we've seen an increase in our membership numbers over the last few weeks. And the Tories, of course, demanded that we release our membership figures. We've done that. Of course, Douglas Ross does not practice what he preaches. He hasn't released his membership figures. There is a word for people that don't practice what they preach. They're called hypocrites, Presiding Officer.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, I know the First Minister has spent the past few weeks thinking about financial mismanagement and the criminal justice system. So today I'd like to ask him about the overspend in the project to replace Barlinnie Prison. Because the issue of financial mismanagement is not just about how the SNP run their party, it's about how they govern our country. This government's failure in managing the public finances has cost the taxpayer more than £3.7 billion. That's the result of failed interventions, waste and incompetence. Earlier this week, it was reported that the cost of building a new prison to replace Barlinnie has spiralled from £100 million to £400 million. So can the First Minister confirm that this project is running over budget, what he expects the final cost to be, and whether the new prison will be operational as planned in September 2026?
First Minister.
We are, and this is an important issue, of course, raised by Anna Sarwar. We are looking at the cost overruns. We're seeing what can be done to mitigate those cost overruns. I think we all agree in relation to the fact that Barlinnie is not in the condition that any of us would like it to be in. So we are exploring what can be done. Can I just say to Anas Sarwar, I think he does the debate a disservice when he talks about the figure that he used, over £3 billion of wastage, as he describes it. In reference to that, I've seen the Labour press release. It talks about decisions that are for the Crown, for example, the Rangers prosecution. That is not a decision for the SNP government. That is an independent decision, of course, for the Crown and Procurator Fiscal Service. So it does it does in fact a disservice to the debate to include figures like that. So we are interrogating the figures in relation to Barlinnie. Of course, construction costs have increased for a whole number of reasons, of course, partly to do with the UK Government's complete mismanagement of the economy, but also to do with some global factors as well. We know the war against Ukraine, the illegal invasion by Russia, of course, has also affected construction costs as well. But to give him a direct answer to his question, those cost overruns are being interrogated, and we'll do everything we can to bring them down.
Anas Sarwar.
It's interesting that the First Minister wants to dispute £60 million out of £3.7 billion of waste under this SNP government. And I'm sorry, blaming Ukraine or the wider economic crisis or inflation on this crisis is not going to work. This is a 300% increase in costs at a time when inflation is running at 10%. Even an SNP treasurer can tell you those figures don't add up, because Scotland's prison estate is in a dire condition. At Greenock Prison, the Chief Inspector of Prisons is threatening to bring in the Health and Safety Executive because of the state of the building. In Inverness, the Prisons Inspectorate has said the prison is not fit for purpose. That prison was due to be replaced at an original cost of £52 million. That cost has now risen to almost £140 million. In fact, in all 5 major capital programmes in the criminal justice system, all are running over budget. So if the First Minister truly believes in transparency, will he commit to opening up the books, and would he welcome an Audit Scotland review into these projects so we can understand why costs are running out of control?
First Minister.
Again, I mean, any sensible suggestions around the cost overruns, I'm happy to take away and to explore. But it is astonishing that Anas Sarwar seems to suggest that these global factors, as well as, of course, domestic factors in relation to inflation, don't have any bearing on construction costs. I think that is not the reality. Of course, what has not helped our economy, what hasn't helped the economy at all, is, of course, a hard Brexit, which is now supported by the Scottish Labour Party quite unbelievably too. So Anas Sarwar is, of course, right to stand up here and to question the costs, be it of HMP Barlinnie and indeed the other prisons and indeed other infrastructure projects. Absolutely correct to do so, and they will be interrogated. You can bet your bottom dollar that they will be interrogated, because, of course, we are absolutely in really challenging financial circumstances. Again, no thanks to the UK Government. But what I would say to Anas Sarwar, when his party was in charge, of course, their PFI projects, we are still having to pay. We are still having to pay £250 million in PFI payments because of the Scottish Labour Party. That certainly doesn't help our budget in any way, shape or form.
Anas Sarwar.
The First Minister talked about desperation earlier on. It is really, really desperate to say that a 300% increase in the cost of Barlinnie Prison is due to somehow global factors around Ukraine and perhaps even Vladimir Putin. And it's also desperate, 16 years into an SNP government, to talk about decisions made by a government when the First Minister was 12 years old.
Mr. Sarwar, Mr. Sarwar,
and take responsibility for a change.
I would be grateful when Mr. Sarwar is putting his question if we could hear it and if members could resist the temptation to make comment at that point. Mr. Sarwar.
I can understand why they're frustrated, presiding officer, so maybe give them a bit of slack this week and maybe in future weeks as well. Because right across the public sector, project after project is running out of control. In health, the new Baird Family Hospital in Aberdeen, initial budget £163 million, now £244 million. In education, a new college campus in Dunfermline, initial budget £86 million, new budget £119 million. And of course, in transport, replacement ferries for Lifeline routes, initial budget £97 million, now running close to £300 million. While families across Scotland are working out how to make ends meet, This SNP government and this First Minister's incompetence is allowing millions of pounds to disappear. This is a government that's been in power for 16 years and has lost grip on taxpayers' money and weakened every institution in our country. Scotland can no longer afford this chaotic, dysfunctional SNP government. Arrogant, incompetent and out of touch.
Mr.
So is it any wonder that people are concluding that it's time for change?
First Minister.
When it comes to the important issues of inequality and poverty, of course, that will be and continues to be a defining mission for this government. That's why, of course, we've invested in that game-changing Scottish Child Payment, which we know has lifted many hundreds of thousands out of poverty. When it comes to the Fuel and Security Fund, that was one of the first announcements, in fact, the first announcement I made as First Minister, not just to double it, but, of course, to triple it. Our Social Security Scotland, we have a number of benefits, 7 benefits that are available only in Scotland. A social security system that is based on fairness, dignity and compassion. So that is, of course, our focus when it comes to tackling inequality. Anna Sarwar says we are desperate, talking about decisions made by the last Labour government. I agree with him. It was many moons ago, and for good reason. And of course, Jackie Baillie was in government very briefly at that point. But it is important to say the reason why we're still talking about it, the reason why we are still talking about it is because we are still paying for it. And Labour mortgaged our future. The Labour Party, the Scottish Labour Party, didn't just mortgage our future, they are mortgaging our children's future as well. So the fact that we are having to pay hundreds of millions in PFI payments 16 years on is, in fact, is undoubtedly the reason why Anna Sarwar doesn't want us talking about it. But, Presiding Officer, the important issues around construction of our prisons, of our infrastructure projects, I take seriously, this government takes seriously, and I can give them an absolute promise that we are doing everything we can to bring those costs down.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when the Cabinet will next meet.
First Minister.
Tuesday.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful for that reply. Presiding Officer, it's enough to fill 19,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's how much sewage we know was dumped into our rivers last year by Scotland's government-owned water company. I say no because only 1 in 20 discharge pipes are actually monitored. But in addition to this, new Liberal Democrat research that we are publishing today reveals over 400 sewage dumps in the vicinity of some of Scotland's best beaches last year. From Peterhead to St Andrews, these award-winning beaches should be protected and pristine. They draw tourists, families and wild swimmers. But like so many other things on the First Minister's desk right now, this absolutely stinks. So can I ask the First Minister, will he now instruct the monitoring of all sewage discharges in Scotland? And what will he do to help Scottish Water get a handle on this? Otherwise, how many swimming pools of poo is he content to see put on our best-loved beaches?
First Minister. Well, this is a serious issue, and Alex Cole-Hamilton, of course, is right to raise it. What I would say, of course, that our beaches, and he mentions a number of them in his question to me, are world-class tourist destinations. So I don't want to see a single sewage dump where it is absolutely unnecessary. So I will take up the issue personally with Scottish Water. I know my Cabinet Secretary is doing that directly with Scottish Water. So he is right to absolutely raise the issue. I will look at it personally myself. I will raise it personally myself with Scottish Water and come back to the member in due course.
Question number 4, Stephanie Callaghan.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to Alcohol Focus Scotland's emergency call to urgently take action to prevent further deaths and reduce harm from alcohol.
First Minister.
Well, first and foremost, my deepest sympathy, and I suspect the deepest sympathy of all of the Chamber, goes to those that have been affected by the loss of a loved one through alcohol. We remain absolutely determined to reduce alcohol-related harm. That's why we've introduced initiatives such as our world-leading minimum unit pricing. Recent research, of course, estimates has saved hundreds of lives. As outlined last week, I'm absolutely committed to reviewing the current level of minimum unit pricing alongside other ongoing work, such as the upcoming UK alcohol treatment guidelines, development of alcohol treatment targets for April 2024, and the expansion of our residential rehab capacity by 50% by the end of this Parliament. Last year, £106.8 million was made available to alcohol and drugs partnerships to support local and national initiatives. We'll carefully consider the points that have been raised by Alcohol Focus Scotland, and the Minister for Drugs and Alcohol is due to meet with them and other stakeholders in the coming weeks to discuss our approach to tackling alcohol harm.
Stephanie Callaghan.
I thank the First Minister for his answer, and I know he will agree that the ongoing alcohol emergency requires a public health-led policy response to save even more lives and reduce health inequalities. So with this in mind, I really appreciate the update there on the developing the alcohol treatment targets. And are you able to say anything about the alcohol brief interventions? Thank you.
First Minister. This is a really important point raised by Stephanie Callaghan in relation to alcohol brief interventions. We remain absolutely committed to our ABI delivery programme. It's been in place for 10 years. We've seen excellent progress and sustained delivery of the national ABI programme across Scotland today, and can I congratulate local partners on the fantastic achievement of that. The alcohol framework does make a commitment to reviewing the evidence on current delivery of ABIs to ensure they're being carried out in the most effective manner. So we're working with Public Health Scotland to review the evidence in the current delivery of alcohol brief interventions to determine how the system could better meet the needs of individuals. And I will update the member in due course once that review has been complete.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We know from National Records of Scotland and Alcohol Focus Scotland that alcohol-specific death rates in Scotland's most deprived areas are over 5 times higher than in the least deprived areas. Similarly, with hospital stays linked to alcohol, we see rates 6 times as high in our most deprived communities compared to our most affluent. There is a clear need for improved access to alcohol-related support services in our most deprived areas who are being badly let down by this government. The alcohol-related and wider health inequalities that exist in our country are both deep and divisive. His predecessor did little to address them. How can the country have any confidence that he will do any better?
First Minister.
I don't agree with that final point, of course. It was my predecessor, when she was Health Secretary, that introduced minimum unit pricing for alcohol. And, of course, it was successive Health Secretaries at the time, of course, that made sure we pushed ahead in the face of considerable opposition, our minimum unit pricing for alcohol. And my understanding, of course, there was considerable opposition from Scottish Labour to minimum unit pricing of alcohol. And when she talks about saving, when Carol Mockin talks about saving lives, it's worth saying that research about minimum unit pricing alcohol has shown us that more than 150 lives a year have been saved, and have resulted, the MUP has also resulted in 411 fewer hospital admissions. We're also encouraging to see that research, and I'm happy to share a copy with Carol Mockin because it's directly related to her question, that the policy is having an effect in Scotland's most deprived areas, which experience higher death rates and levels of harm from problem alcohol usage. So I'm happy to give Carol Mockin further detail of what more can be done, but I'm confident in saying that this government is taking action in alcohol-related harm, particularly in areas of highest deprivation.
Willie Rennie.
A new study from the University of Glasgow found a correlation between the minimum unit pricing and the 13.4% reduction in deaths. But the 50p rate was set over a decade ago, and inflation has been raging since. So we do need a change to catch up. So will the First Minister bring forward that review of minimum unit pricing, uprate it from 50p, and bring forward legislation to tie it to inflation to save lives in the future?
First Minister.
Can I pay credit to Willie Rennie? I know he has raised this issue many times. When I was Health Secretary, he raised the issue with me a few times as well, and he makes a really important point about the research. Willie Rennie will, of course, know, because he was in Parliament at the time, that there was robust legal challenge in relation to minimum unit pricing. So we are ensuring, of course, that when it comes to review of minimum unit pricing, that we have as robust evidence in place if there ever was to be another legal challenge to a potential increase in the minimum unit pricing. So important that we do have that robust evidence base to determine and support any decision on a change in the level of MUP. The conclusion of the review of the level of MUP will be concluded in late 2023. Willie Rennie has asked me to look to see if that can be brought forward. I, of course, will do that. I'll have that discussion. But I just go back to my first point, of course. It's so important that we have a robust evidence in place for any decision that is made in relation to minimum unit pricing.
Question number 5, Jamie Green.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to new Police Scotland statistics showing that the number of recorded rapes has increased to its highest level in 6 years.
First Minister.
Let me say, first and foremost, that it is abhorrent that women continue to face violence and rape, and we will continue to take robust action to tackle sexual offending through Scotland's Equally Safe strategy, focused on prevention, on improving support and modernising the law. It's vitally important that anyone who faces violence, sexual violence, rape in particular, has the confidence and support to report these crimes, and that the justice system does respond. Jamie Green will be well aware. In fact, I think I heard him on the radio this morning speaking about the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill introduced to Parliament this week. That will further strengthen the response of the justice system, putting victims and witnesses, crucially, at the very heart of the justice system. It also proposes to implement the significant reforms that were recommended by Lady Dorian in her report to improve the management of sexual offences, including a specialist court for sexual offending.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the First Minister and echo many of the comments he's made, and we should also, as Parliament, commend the bravery of those who do come forward to report this horrific crime. But I think it's a dangerous assumption to make that a rise in recorded cases is simply a byproduct of more people coming forward and not an underlying rise in the levels of crime of this nature itself. And that's sort of qualitative work I would expect the Government to already be doing in this regard. The real problem, Presiding Officer, is that the entire system, from end to end, is letting victims of crime down, from the initial reporting experience to the lengthy delays in getting trials to come to pass up to 4 years in some cases. It's horrendous. The court experience itself is re-traumatising, and even if, and it is an if, a conviction is secured, and we all know that conversion rates are notoriously low in Scotland, the victim of that crime faces the injustice of watching the perpetrator dished out a lenient sentence relative to the gravity of the crime that was committed against that victim. So what I would say to the First Minister, as a former Justice Secretary himself, is if he will make a personal commitment today to those victims of this horrific crime, that he will undertake a root and branch review of how this country handles and processes cases of rape. Will he undertake a review into why these figures are at such high levels in Scotland? And will he commit to working with victims' organisations and victims themselves to finally put them at the heart of this justice system? Far too many women have been let down by the system, and that's got to change, Presiding Officer.
First Minister.
Can I thank Jamie Green for what was a really important question? And many of the points I agree with. Some perhaps I will try to address and come back to him in writing in further detail. What I would say is he's right. We don't make an assumption that the rise in cases is simply down to greater reporting and greater awareness. Though it's fair to say, in terms of non-recent cases, historical cases, we have seen a rise in the reporting, and that's not just the case in Scotland. We know that's the case right across the UK, and I suspect in many jurisdictions right across the world. There has been a focus on trying to raise awareness of reporting cases of rape and sexual offences in particular. There's also been a greater consistency in approach in the use of specialist police officers in this regard as well. In terms of a few of the points that Jamie Green raises, and I think he is absolutely right to raise them, that is the entire purpose, of course, of the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Bill that has been introduced. It is putting victims and witnesses at the heart of our justice system. I have the great pleasure of meeting a number of families and activists, campaigners, victims, witnesses, survivors yesterday at a meeting to discuss the bill. I say great pleasure because out of the most horrific circumstances and enormous tragedy, they have been at the heart of campaigning through their bravery, through their courage for better reform to the justice system. And the bill that we have introduced, I think it's fair to say, by any objective measure, is bold, it's ambitious, probably the biggest change that we will see in our justice system if the bill is passed in decades. Some might even say longer than that. What I would say to Jamie Green is he's asked for a kind of root and branch review, I think, of sexual offences and rape cases. Of course, that review was done by Lady Doreen, and of course many of the recommendations or many of the clauses within the bill are a direct result of that work done by Lady Doreen. So we'll continue to invest in the justice system to continue to bring those court backlogs down, and they are of course falling. What I would say to Jamie Green is that Angela Constance, Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, who's leading this bill, she will be engaging with every single opposition member, as you'd expect her to, and of course we will take this bill forward in as open-minded and a constructive way so we can take, hopefully, all of this Parliament through these justice reforms together.
Pauline McNeill.
These alarming statistics on rape are a further indication of ingrained levels of violence against women and misogyny across our society. Scottish Labour has been running a consultation with the full involvement of government officials to tackle violence against women. But sadly, it has confirmed existing research that young girls have been subjected to a rape culture in schools and across university campuses. And many are receiving unwanted sexual images becoming too normalised behaviour. I hope the First Minister will agree with me that we need to tackle the root cause of the problem in our society by talking directly to boys and young men in all of our schools and our campuses to talk about their attitude to women and girls.
First Minister. I couldn't agree more with Pauline McNeill's question and the statements that she makes. When I was Justice Secretary, again, I would say I had the pleasure of seeing a programme being delivered in a school not too far away from this Parliament, which was directly talking to young boys, particularly around the issue of consent. And it was a really engaging session that was had there. And Pauline McNeill was absolutely right. We have to tackle the root cause. And the root cause, unfortunately, is predatory men. And we have to intervene as early as we possibly can. And I support everything that Pauline McNeill said in her question. We have, as a government, supported and will continue to support Emily's test. I know Pauline McNeill is very aware of the fantastic work that is done by Fiona Drey and, of course, by Emily's family. Again, a terrible, horrific tragedy, using that tragedy to make sure that nobody else hopefully has to suffer what Emily had to suffer. So we've supported Emily's test to create its groundbreaking gender-based violence charter. I think it's the only initiative of its kind in the UK. What I'd finally say to Pauline McNeill, if I heard her correctly, I believe she said that the Scottish Labour Party were undertaking their own consultation. When that is ready to be published, if she wouldn't mind sharing that with me personally, but of course with the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, I'd be very, very interested in the results of that consultation.
Question number 6, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that published NHS waiting times for treatment are accurate.
First Minister.
Published statistics are collated and quality assured by Public Health Scotland. They're published as part of the full release of national statistics each quarter. National statistics status means that the official statistics meet the highest standards of trustworthiness, of quality, of public value. The UK Statistics Authority has designated PHS stats as national statistics, therefore signifying their compliance with the Code of Practice for Statistics.
Jackie Baillie.
There are, of course, 1 in 7 Scots on waiting lists currently, and senior clinicians have warned that the waiting time statistics published on NHS Inform are both inaccurate and misleading. I wrote to the UK Statistics Authority in October last year. They agreed and asked the Scottish Government to make changes. 6 months later, and very little has changed. Clinicians are still up in arms about the stats being skewed. The Scottish Government continues to use median waiting times and mixes emergency and elective care. So can I ask the First Minister, will he now stop pulling the wool over people's eyes, rectify this misleading data, and can he tell us, did he publish the stats whilst knowing about the criticism of their flaws?
First Minister.
No, we did not. And of course, we read the letter, received the letter from the Stats Authority. And of course, I engaged with the Scottish Society of Orthopaedic Consultants. And of course, I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary for Health will continue to meet with the same organisation. It is incorrect for Jackie Bailey to suggest that changes weren't made. So she's right, of course. We received that letter in October 2022. We then worked with Public Health Scotland and NHS 24 to review and address those key points that were made. Following the recommendations from the Office of Statistic Regulations, we made a number of changes. That included, for example, highlighting both the strengths and indeed the limitations that the data showed on the website. There is also now additional links for the full release of national statistics on the PHS website. That provides further information in relation to the distribution of waiting times for patients who have completed their waits, but also those who are still waiting. And in terms of the criticism from the Scottish Committee for Orthopaedics and Trauma, Scott, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, will, of course, continue to meet with them. But can I commend them and their members and all of those working in NHS Scotland for the fact that despite significant ongoing pressure, of course, we have seen that the number of outpatients waiting longer than 2 years for a new outpatient appointment has reduced by 50% since September 2022 and by over 60% since June 2022.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Claire Hawley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may be aware that South Lanarkshire Council has recently increased the cost to local youth teams and clubs who hire football pitches, swimming pools and halls by up to 114%. I have spoken with many from across Rutherglen constituency who fear they cannot afford this and are worried that the clubs may have to fold. Does the First Minister agree with me that the Labour administration at South Lanarkshire Council should be focusing on increasing uptake of sports and physical activity, that temporarily suspending the increase isn't good enough, and that instead they should be scrapping these damaging price increases without further delay?
Can I, before the First Minister responds, can I just remind members of the requirement that questions should relate to matters for which the Scottish Government has general responsibility? And if you can answer in that light, First Minister.
Well, while it is clearly for local administrations to determine their own priorities, but like Claire Hawkey, frankly, I'm appalled at the actions of Labour-led authority in South Lanarkshire. I saw a protest taking place by young people suggesting that it was time for Joe Fagan, the leader of South Lanarkshire Council, to go. I have to say I think those young people have frankly very good judgment indeed. So while families are facing ongoing eye-watering hikes in food and energy bills, having to cut back on other expenditure, this is not the right time to ramp up these charges and potentially deny children and young people in constituencies like Rutherglen the chance to take part in sport. So I can only hope that the Council see sense and turn this temporary reprieve into a permanent one.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Friday last week, Tayside Aviation, based in Dundee, went into administration with the immediate loss of 22 jobs. Tayside Aviation partnered with a number of universities providing degree courses in pilot training. Students on these courses, some of them my constituents, now face an uncertain future, not able to complete their degrees and having lost thousands of pounds in fees paid upfront to Tayside Aviation, which may not be recoverable. Some students have student loans now to repay, but nothing to show for the money. So how can the Scottish Government help my constituents caught in this desperate situation?
First Minister.
This is a very important issue, and Murdo Fraser, of course, is right to raise it here. I'm very saddened to hear of the job losses at Tayside Aviation. My thoughts, of course, are with the workers that have been affected, their families, and rightly so with the students as well. And I appreciate that this position has put students in great difficulty. I understand their concerns about money that they've paid for lessons, and anybody impacted should, of course, contact the Joint Administrators. Further information, including links to the Joint Administrators Insolvency Portal, are on the Tayside Aviation website. We're actively taking steps to understand how this will impact students funded by the Scottish Government. University students should have been contacted directly by their university, and we're also engaging with Middlesex University, who are delivery partners for that course. I should have said, in terms of the workers as well, our PACE team stand ready to be able to offer any assistance they can. We'll continue to examine and explore this issue to see what we can do to minimise the impact on the students in particular, and I'll report back to Murdo Fraser in due course.
Claire Baker.
Thank you, President Officer. So last week, Yes Recycling Fife entered administration as a result of cash flow difficulties stemming from its inability to operate at full capacity. Only opened in September last year, it is a state-of-the-art recycling centre and now 60 jobs are on the brink. It received £520,000 from the Circular Economy Investment Fund, administered by Zero Waste Scotland, with funding from the European Regional Development Fund and the Scottish Government. Can I ask what discussions the Scottish Government have had to determine why, after less than a year, this important facility has collapsed and has been unable to operate at full capacity, and what support the Scottish Government are offering to the employees?
First Minister.
I am concerned about the difficulty that Yes Recycling finds itself in, and of course my thoughts with those 60 staff members that are working at the company and the facility in Glenrothes. This will be a very, very difficult time for the staff and indeed for their families. To give her some reassurance, Scottish Enterprise is engaging with the administrator and will provide all possible assistance to help to maintain jobs at the site. In the unfortunate event that any individual should be facing redundancy, the Scottish Government will provide support through PACE, the Partnership Action for Continuing Employment. PACE have, I understand, reached out to the administrator to offer support to the affected staff, and I can confirm that a local PACE team has provided information on the support available for employees and has requested to meet with the administrator. So hopefully through providing skills, development and employment support, PACE will aim to minimise the time individuals affected by redundancy are out of work. But I will take everything that Claire Baker has said away and see if there's anything further we can do in relation to a very, very difficult situation at Yes Recycling in Glenrothes.
Fergus Ewing.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister welcome the announcement this week of a planned investment by Quantum Energy Partners to a value of £300 million in my constituency, an investment which will focus on a site in Ardersier that will develop work in offshore wind and also oil decommissioning, and which will bring massive benefits, possibly for the remainder of the century in terms of employment in the renewable energy field. Does he agree that this development strengthens yet further the case for the dualling of the A96, a case which is supported, Presiding Officer, by over 90% of the readers of the excellent Press and Journal, the authentic voice of the North? And will he expedite, at long last, the delivery of the dualling of the section from Inverness to Aldern, including the Nairn bypass?
First Minister.
Yes, I do welcome that news, of course, of that very important investment. Indeed, decommissioning is integral to the pursuit of an orderly, managed transition to net zero, and has the potential to create significant benefits and opportunities for people right across Scotland. Since 2017, through our own decommissioning challenge fund, the Scottish Government has invested £12 million to support innovation and build capacity in the decommissioning sector. Turning to roads, we remain absolutely committed to improving the A96, and the current plan is, of course, to fully dual the routes. But we are currently undertaking a review, as the member knows, of this corridor, with the outcomes expected this summer for consultation. In addition, we remain absolutely committed to dualling the Inverness to Nairn section, including the Nairn bypass, and will complete the statutory process for that as soon as possible.
And Tess White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, last night, for the second time, the screening of the documentary Adult Human Female at Edinburgh University had to be cancelled as protesters blockaded entrances to the venue. Women were shut out and discussion about women's rights was shut down. Do you agree that freedom of speech should be defended in our academic institutions, and will you join me in urging Edinburgh University to ensure the event can take place?
First Minister.
I do agree with Tess White about the importance of freedom of speech, and more so in our educational institutions, like our universities. That they should be a space, a safe space for debate, discussion, robust as that may well be. Of course, I haven't seen the film in question, the adult human female film. I don't know the contents of it. My understanding is that there was a protest against the film taking place, and then there was a separate protest which ended up denying those who wanted to see the film access to the screening. Now, it is, of course, a matter for Edinburgh University. I won't look to intervene in that sense, but I think I have made it perfectly clear in relation to my stance on freedom of speech, particularly within universities. Now, I see that as no conflict with the other stance that I'm very proud of, which is supporting trans rights. That is something I am unequivocal about, but we should ensure that our universities are a place, our universities and society more generally, are a place where we can have that even robust exchange of ideas. So I'm sure Edinburgh University have heard what I've had to say and what Tess White has had to say, but it is really important that this is ultimately a decision for Edinburgh University to take.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a members' business debate in the name of Ariane Burgess, and there will be a short suspension now to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so before the debate begins.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes,